That kind of brings us into our next guy, which is T. Higgins. Keep trade cut, wide receiver 25 at the moment. He was as high as like wide receiver like 11, 12, I believe, at some point. And people put him down there, number one, because Joe Burrow got hurt. Number two, because he keeps getting hurt and he's finishing as a wide receiver too. I think that when you have that number one wide receiver across from you, people automatically tend to think there can't be another great wide receiver that puts up numbers. And that's just not the case. We've seen that time and time over again from year to year. And you can do that most recently with like an A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, where they don't even throw the ball. They didn't even throw the ball as much as some other teams, right? But I wrote down a couple of things as I was like being reminded. Antonio Brown and Juju, right? We talked about Devonta and AJ, Waddle and Tyreek Hill, Godwin and Mike Evans, Thielen and Diggs. I mean, Jordy Nelson and Devontae, DK and Lockett. I mean, you can go back to Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce days. Like, you can have two fantasy wide receiver ones on the same
Marvin
team.
Harrison, Reggie Wayne.
Like, there you go. Boom. So that can happen, right? So I think that a lot of people automatically blow that off to where like there can't be another, especially if you look about all those kind of situations, think about who the quarterback was for most of those guys. They all had great quarterbacks. Like, we're talking about Joe Burrow, who can throw for over 40 touchdowns, 5,000 yards this season if he's healthy, if Jamar Chase is healthy, if T. Higgins is healthy. Now, obviously, all the stars have to align, and they haven't all aligned yet for them. Could this be the year that happens, right? We know what these guys are capable of. We could see a 1,700-yard, 15 tutty season from Jamar Chase coming up. Like,
I will say this, I totally agree, because there's facts to back it up, right? There's hard facts to back it up, pause, where you can see that over the course of throughout the NFL. And also, too, another really quick point was, we're becoming such a passing league now where it's even more of a reason to support the argument that we're going to be making here. But I will say the one kind of devil's advocate thing for T. Higgins is it's gonna limit his upside at some point. Like, that's a factor here, because Jamar Chase is there. Now, they're most likely going to lose Tyler Boyd, right? So maybe T. Higgins kind of absorbs some of that Tyler Boyd trust from a Joe Burrow, and that just vaults T. Higgins into that kind of high-end wide receiver too, because he's had finishes of 30 his rookie year, 22 his second year, 17 his third year. Obviously took the hit last year because of the injury and, the lingering injuries, but you could see he was on a trajectory to move into that low end wide receiver one type, situation. And then obviously Joe Burrow injured as well. So you could see all that kind of come into fruition. But I do think, just from, like I said, a devil's advocate standpoint, having Jamar Chase definitely limits his upside. But
for sure,
would I rather have T. Higgins as a number 2 in a Joe Burrow led offense, or some other guy? You know what I mean? Like, that's how you have to look at it. And also, too, Jamar Chase opens things up for T. Higgins, right? T. Higgins doesn't see all the number one coverage rolled his way on a week in, week out basis. So it's and so they franchise tag T. Higgins. He's officially on the franchise tag. And what does his future hold? Because they're going to have to pay Jamar Chase at some point.
Yeah, so he'll have to go somewhere else. Now, I mean, for me, I have T. Higgins pretty high compared to like keep trade cut. I have him around like 15-ish or so. But I like T. Higgins. I think if he does go to another team, he is a guy that can possibly give you that wide receiver one production. And even if he does stay with Joe Burrow, like, I'm okay with that back end wide receiver one numbers, the high end wide receiver two numbers. Now, obviously, he's got to stay healthy. That obviously is a concern, and he hasn't been able to do that. And he hasn't missed like a ton of games, but he's been banged up a bunch where he'll play. He comes out in the first quarter or after a couple plays. There's a bunch of games that he's done that. So it's tough. Now, if he goes somewhere else, then he doesn't have that capped upside kind of like you were talking about, depending where he goes. But I would guess if he went somewhere else, it would be for him to be the guy. So I do like T. Higgins. I think that depending on your league, there's like a mixed bag of people, mixed reactions for T. Higgins, right? There's people that, like me, I'm saying I'm going to buy right now. If most of the community is looking at him as wide receiver 25, like for me, that's a buy, right? Can I go from, like, I'll go down from many of these guys: Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, Drake London, Nico Collins, Devonta Smith, DJ Moore. Give me a piece and T. Higgins, and you can gladly have any of those guys. It's a big tier for me, right? That's moving up and down the tier, right? Can I get a second? Can I get a late first on top of it? Can I get something that I need? You know, how much can I push? Because there are people, like I said, that like T. Higgins. There's people that don't. Other people like me do like T. Higgins, and we're like, all right, I'm not going to trade him away for marbles. So if I'm going to trade him away, my price is going to be relatively high. So I think that the price you have to pay for T. Higgins is going to differ in leagues with GMs. So I think it's very hard to say, you know, what to do. But if somebody's high on T. Higgins, I'm absolutely fine selling him. Give me a piece and somebody in that same tier that I have him in. And I would love to buy him if you're going to value him in that, you know, in that 25-ish range tier. So I think right now he's pretty much a hold if you have him. But if the right situation comes across, I'm okay going either way.
I'm buying for two reasons. The first one you already mentioned is because the value, if he's at wide receiver 25 value, and I can get him at wide receiver, you know, if I'm getting him at wide receiver 25 value and he's producing at wide receiver, say 17, 15, 12, right? Somewhere in that range, 12 to 15, 12 to 17, automatically it's a bargain. The second reason I'm buying T. Higgins, this is a contract year, right? He's franchise tagged. He's going to be there. I can foresee him going out there and going 1,200 yards, closing in on 10 touchdowns, right? He does have a cap to me because, like I said before, he does play with Jamar Chase. But the two reasons I'm buying him, number one, the value is probably going to be there because of the injury. And then obviously Joe Burrow getting injured as well, just absolutely cratered his season. And I think he's going to have a big year because he's in a contract year. He has something to prove, right? He's got the franchise tag on him essentially. So I think there's a couple of reasons to buy him. So yeah, I'm a big fan of T. Higgins. I would say this though, I'm cautiously optimistic because I think he's going into year 5 now, right? And we haven't had that explosion per se. He's been really consistent over the first 3 years, and then we know what happened last year. So I'm cautiously optimistic. The injury concern and, you know, his physical play does concern me a bit, kind of a la Mike Evans, but you've seen what Mike Evans has been able to do, you know, over the course of the last decade. So he kind of has a little bit of that Mike Evans in him where he isn't crazy explosive, but he's just a big physical guy that makes plays, right? And I love when I see him out there, he can dominate games, right? He has wide receiver one upside.
We saw that.
He has wide receiver 1 upside on a week-to-week basis, and he gave you a couple of those flashes this season, right? Week 2 against Baltimore, 8 catches, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's big. Really quick, week 16, 5 catches, 140 yards and a touchdown. So he has that. He has that in him for sure, but it's been a bit of a roller coaster.
I mean, look, if you pull up the top 15 wide receivers for any given year, the majority of them have a great quarterback at the helm. And we've mentioned that a little bit earlier. The majority of them have a great quarterback. So he's a higher percentage guy that you can take a bet on. I think for me and like our community, like we love T. Higgins. We want to buy T. Higgins, but other communities are not so high on him. Like I've been able to buy him. I traded Jordan Love and Demario Douglas for Dak Prescott and T. Higgins, like in the startup. So I'll take it. But in other leagues, it's not easy to get T. Higgins. Like people really like him. So I think it's tough. But for the main part of it, like, yes, I'm absolutely buying or trying to buy. I'm inquiring to buy, and then that will determine whether I'm going to buy him or not, obviously, depending on the price.